Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. I am Abram Kielsmeyer-Jones, and today, 2 days early, we are celebrating International Septuagint Day. And we're taking a webinar to do that, taking the hour to talk about the Septuagint in general. What is it? Why is it important? And then how can you study it and actually read it in accordance? So that's the focus today. There's a handout that is available to you. It is in the GoToWebinar control panel. So once you log in, you see a control panel that's got a number of sections, one of which is the handout section. Let me know if you have any issues accessing that. And the way that you can communicate with me is through the questions box, which is basically a one-way typed chat. Any comments or questions that you've got at any point, type them in there. I check that from time to time, especially if you're having any issues with any of the technology. But the handout is there. This is also being recorded, and so if you are here now, that means you registered, which means you'll automatically get a link to the recording and the handout later on today. And if you are watching this later on a recording, you can email me at abramkj@accordancebible.com and get the handout that way. All right, so let's start talking about International Septuagint Day. This coming Saturday, it will be the not quite 20th, we're getting close to that, but it'll be the 19th annual Septuagint Day, International Septuagint Day. This comes from the International Organization for Septuagint and Cognate Studies. And you can find a link there. It's in the description, but it's also here in the handout. It will take you to this page. This is a great website, the IOSCS, and this talks about the International Septuagint Day, why it was chosen, some ways to celebrate, lots of good stuff linked. And then you may just want to take some time on this page. You can go here to IOSCS and see what all is here. They've just moved to a new website that you'll easily be able to find your way to. Lots of great stuff going on. So I commend that to you. That's where International Septuagint Day comes from. Good occasion to celebrate. So there are four main areas of focus today. The first is to talk about what is the Septuagint and why study it. And so I'm assuming for that section, well, I'm not assuming anything. I should say that section will be relevant to you whether you've got a world of knowledge and experience with the Septuagint, or if you only just kind of know what it is but haven't really delved into it. This is really meant for everybody. And then from there, we'll build on that and we'll talk about getting started with the Septuagint in accordance. We'll talk about yet more Septuagint resources. And then we'll spend some time in accordance. I'll be in accordance showing some Septuagint related workspaces. So understanding what the Septuagint is, being maybe convinced we want to study it, getting started, getting a lay of the land with more resources. How do we actually get into it in accordance? Everything I'm showing you today you can do in print, and that's wonderful too. I love to study with the print book. Today will be accordance specific, especially on this fourth one when we talk about some different workspaces. This is a pretty long handout, and that's because I've given you some for further reading at the end for those of you who want to spend even more time than this. But let's start with what is the Septuagint and why study it? It is just the translation of the Hebrew scriptures into Greek, made by multiple translators, and I note here that it spans the 3rd to 1st centuries BC. You may see the abbreviation LXX, and that comes from the tradition, apocryphal tradition, and by that I mean it's legend. It's probably not historically true, but it is said that there were 70 plus 2 who translated it. So that gives us, it's really 72, but I guess they round down to 70, and so we get LXX. Now, the first thing I would do, and in fact, the first thing I do when preparing for a webinar like this, or even just thinking about this topic on my own, is I would go to the research function in accordance and see what you already have in your library about the Septuagint. You may be surprised that even if you don't have a Septuagint specific resource, you'll probably have, depending on how many collections and resources, you'll probably have at least a Bible dictionary or something that explains the Septuagint. So I'm just going to demonstrate that very briefly to make sure everyone's familiar with that. Go to File, New tab. I'm in Accordance 13 on a Mac. Research is down here in that app. I think it's further up elsewhere. You can also, by the way, if you've got your toolbar showing, there's a research tab right there. So I'm just going to type in Septuagint. I'm going to do the shortcut way, and I'll hit enter. And let's just see what it's searched. I just want to look at this. We've got a whole webinar on this research function. It's very powerful. But I searched the English word Septuagint. That's good. That's what I wanted to do. And it just searched everything in my library, which is fine. We'll just start with that. So I've got some dictionaries, some commentaries, some lexicons, some grammars, some visual devotionals, all kinds of stuff that have the word Septuagint in it. I might, for an initial study, go to a dictionary. And in fact, here's a heading well, it's under the Jewish conceptual background of repentance. So that's great, but that's not going to be an introductory article, whereas something like this might. Apocrypha and Septuagint, or even here, this is an entry on the Septuagint in the Anchor Yale Bible Dictionary. And typically, even in a long entry like this, you can see all of the points and subpoints. I mean, this gets to be a really detailed field of study. But even here, you've got just this introductory paragraph that even here tells you where we get the word, what it means, and what it is. So I won't belabor that because that's something you might like to do on your own, and what's in your library, if it's got the word Septuagint, it will show up. You could also consider, notice in this search that you've got Septuagint showing. You could also consider searching for LXX, or even just doing an OR command so that your resources are pulling up anytime the word Septuagint or LXX occurs. You can see that's going to take a little bit longer of a search, but you might take some time just to go through your library and see what's there. Like I say, it may be not a Septuagint specific resource, and it might still have a lot about the Septuagint. I just note here in the handout that this work of translating the Hebrew scriptures into Greek was an act of incarnation. It was an acknowledgement, and maybe this is kind of reading this through a lens of Protestantism a little bit, although it's true in Catholicism and Orthodoxy, this idea that the people should have scripture in their own language. That was one of the drivers of the Protestant Reformation, and I think pretty typically you'll see that in a broad swath of churches today, that the people, and not just Christianity, other languages as well, or other religions as well, I should say, that the people should have scripture in their own language. Well, I'm not going to go through all of this one by one, but let me just highlight a few reasons to study the Septuagint. There is a whole world of textual criticism here, where when we understand that the Septuagint was translated from a set of Hebrew texts that are earlier than a lot of the Hebrew texts underlying the English Old Testament, that helps us get closer to the original text. But let me try to say that another way. If you open up a print Bible and it has a big heading called Old Testament and a big heading called New Testament, that Old Testament is going to be probably translated from English, or from Hebrew into English. Well, the Septuagint was also translated from Hebrew, but it was done with earlier manuscripts, 3rd to 1st centuries BC. If you look at an Old Testament, it's going to be translating Hebrew manuscripts that are more like 1,000 years old, give or take, rather than 2,000 years old. So the Septuagint is translating Hebrew text with older sources than what you might have in an English Bible that translates the Old Testament from Hebrew. Let me know if that doesn't make sense, but the bottom line is that helps us get closer to older, maybe more original manuscripts. And there's a whole field there, and even this, I wouldn't say this is a controversial statement, but there's no real cut and dry with this. I mean, age doesn't, it's not the be all and end all, but it does get you into the world of, well, what do I do with a Septuagint text that looks like it's got a different underlying Hebrew than my English text? How do I make sense of that? And that is the wide and wonderful and sometimes confusing world of textual criticism. That's one reason to study it. And related to that, you'll find in the New Testament a lot of the quotations when the New Testament quotes the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. It's actually not that maybe the Hebrew Bible is a misnomer, because they're often quoting the Greek translation. Here's a quote from a great book, First Bible of the Church. Mueller says, for the New Testament authors, the original text, that is the text they drew on, was primarily the Septuagint. To make up the first part of the Bible, which has the New Testament as the other part, the Old Testament in the shape it has in the Septuagint would therefore seem the obvious choice. Now, I do note there's a little bit of a theological conclusion here, and we don't need to get into that, but he is just making an empirical observation. And it is also the case that you will have some English Bibles. This is one of them, the St. Athanasius Academy Septuagint. So here's a resource you might consider. This is a Septuagint in English, translated, of course, from Greek. But if you look at the larger Bible of which it's a part, the English Orthodox Bible, and this takes, in this case here, we've got the New King James and the New Testament, but for the Old Testament, rather than having the New King James Old Testament, they have this translation of the Septuagint, and that's the Bible. So if you, and again, think physically here, although, I mean, no reason we couldn't open it in accordance and look through the books here. So it's all here. But if you were to hold this Bible physically in your hand, all of it would be translated from Greek, both testaments. And that's different from if you were to go into a mainline church and pick up an NRSV or an NIV off of the pew, that would have an Old Testament translated from Hebrew, a New Testament translated from Greek. So that's yet another reason to study the Septuagint. There are more reasons here, and I will just leave them to you for further reading, but let me just highlight this last one. Very practically speaking, reading the Septuagint is a great way to practice both Hebrew and Greek at the same time. And this connects to what I've been saying, that the Septuagint, it's translating the Hebrew, and you may find an instance where you're looking at a Hebrew text that's, based on manuscripts 1,000 years old. You're looking at a Septuagint text, and it appears to have a different Hebrew word underneath it, and you have to make a decision, and to do that, you're using both languages. Even if you're not doing text criticism, let's just take Genesis 1 at a very basic level, and this kind of previews what we're going to get into next. So I'll walk through all of this again. But if I have a Septuagint text and go to Genesis 1, and if I have, well, I can just go to add parallel, and let's open up a Hebrew text. And maybe I have English somewhere in here as well, but for now, if I'm studying the Greek and Hebrew, one thing I like to do, for example, is I will start reading through in one or other of the languages, and I'll use the other language as a guide before I let myself go to English. So I might even close the instant details here, and I might let's start with Hebrew. Let's say I'm working on my Hebrew, but I also want to work on my Greek. I might go to Bereshit. Now, I happen to know what that word means because it's the first word in the Bible, and I've looked at it before, but it's, maybe not the most common word, or maybe one you forgot. Well, you can just flip over to the Greek, NRK, in the beginning. Epoiesin, bara. If you didn't know epoiesin in Greek, you could look at bara in Hebrew. Maybe you know that, vice versa. So that's another great reason, I think, to read the Septuagint. You can practice both Hebrew and Greek in a way that you could with the New Testament. There are Hebrew language New Testaments, of course. Those would tend to be more modern Hebrew rather than biblical Hebrew. So if you're doing this, you are taking the language that the Septuagint, one of the earliest translations into Greek, and the language that the Hebrew Bible was written in, namely Hebrew, and you're comparing them and working on both languages at once. All right, so you're already here. You don't need to be sold on why study the Septuagint, but I do find these reasons compelling. There are other reasons here that I haven't gone over, but I will leave this with you. Let me know what questions or comments you have on either what the Septuagint is or why we might study it. And then after that, after we do any questions, we're gonna, we just kind of got into this a little bit now, but we'll go deeper into getting started with the Septuagint in accordance. So let's see what comments and questions folks have. Here's a great comment. I'll put this in the chat. Somebody says, it seems to me that almost all, if not all, of the Old Testament quotes in the letter to the Hebrews are LXX quotes and not Masoretic text source. There is, just to speak to that, there's a great resource that we do not have in accordance, and it's Archer and somebody else, and I'm forgetting, somebody will know that Chiri Chingo, I think, or something like that is the second name, but it's basically a compendium of all of the citations and quotations, and it will do, so as far as this idea of Hebrews quoting the Septuagint, prioritizing it over the Hebrew text where they differ, that resource has a whole list of it. But you can also look at this on your own. We've got parallel. Let me see what we've got, something along those lines here in accordance. Let me circle back to that. But yes, thank you for that comment. And that is one reason to study the Septuagint. You may be surprised when you look at it in Greek and then compare it to your English Bible in the Old Testament. There may be more difference there. That may be where you notice it more. But yeah, there are some good resources for this. Let me see if I can just pull up something quickly to put in the chat box for you, so that you've got web browser. And I'm just going to go Abram KJ review T Michael Law when God spoke Greek. We'll see how quickly I can get to this, and there it is. And I'm not here for self-promotion, but just to say I've written about this idea a little bit, because he talks about this idea of the Septuagint behind the New Testament. And so there is, here I interact with his claim, and I mean, agree or disagree with me, that's fine. And some of this is hard to show for sure, but here is where I kind of list where you might find some more resources. Yeah, here it is, Cherry Chigno and Archer. There is, in fact, in accordance, Silva has an article where he lists 108 instances when Paul cites the Hebrew scriptures, and then where it's closer to the Septuagint, where it's closer to the Hebrew. This would not, I'm almost sure, include Paul for him, but you may find something similar in another resource. But that's another link you might check out. I interact a little bit more with this idea of what is the text behind the text here. But yeah, thanks for that comment about Hebrews. Yeah, and here's an interesting follow-up comment from the same person. Implication being the author was steeped in Greek text and possibly did not read Hebrew well. Yeah, I mean, of course, it's a possibility. Yeah, and I think that is what makes this so interesting, is that we have data like that, and then the question is, well, what conclusion can we draw from that? And it gets really interesting when we talk about things like translation technique, and where the first 5 books tend to be fairly, wooden's not the right word, and I don't know that literal is the right word, but they tend to be fairly one-to-one in their translation from Hebrew to Greek. But other books not so, and so it raises the question: why is this? It's sort of like the difference between the NASB and the New Living Translation. Different translation technique, and the Septuagint has that too, even among the different books. So, as with the Hebrews point, we always do well to ask that interpretive question of why. All right, well, this is very interesting, and yeah, there's a lot more here, but yeah, thanks for those comments. And let's talk now about getting started with the Septuagint in accordance. And this is really, if you haven't done much with this, this is who that's targeted for, or even if you just want a refresher. I've got a list here. I'm not going to click through all of these, but they're all hyperlinks. I think probably the first few things you want to think about, well, one is a Septuagint text. So that's going to be in Greek, obviously, and then an English translation of the Septuagint. So I mentioned 2 here, Rolf for a Septuagint text. and the New English Translation of the Septuagint, NETS. Those are both hyperlinked there. The NETS is also available free online if you don't have it in accordance and want to access it that way. I would just search NETS Septuagint, and you'll see here, like if you go to Genesis, it'll take you to a PDF, which is, I find the accordance integrated version much more useful, but either way, this is a good translation. I have places where I probably would not translate it the way they do, but this is also done by some of the best scholars in the field, so I take it seriously. Every book starts with an introduction, and it's doing this same kind of thing we're talking about, comparing like how is, for example, the Septuagint uses the word gay for earth or ground, but it uses it for multiple different Hebrew words. And what do we make of that? So it's got a really interesting, just like 3 or 4 pages at the beginning of every book talking about translation technique and issues, and then maybe more than 3 or 4 pages. Then it goes into the translation. So this is in accordance, NETS, and then Rolf's for a text. So you're going to want to actually be looking at Greek Septuagint. And now in accordance, when you have the NETS open in parallel with this, it's going to do what a PDF wouldn't, which is as you scroll and advance one, the other follows, just like any other parallel text. You could study the Septuagint with only something like the NIV, but remember that with the large majority of English translations, and I would say probably unless they specify otherwise, their Old Testament is translated from Hebrew. So if you're looking at the Greek, and there are examples, there aren't major ones, but if you're looking at the Greek text here, and if you have something like the NRSV or let's say the NIV open, more often than not, you're going to get an English translation that matches the Greek. But as we've said, the Hebrew and the Greek don't always line up one for one, or there might have been a different underlying Hebrew text. And so this will not always be 100% accurate in terms of translating the Greek. It will be translating the Hebrew. So that's why I mentioned a Septuagint specific translation. There is the NETS. There is, well, you can even just search your library, but there is this, I mentioned the St. Athanasius Academy Septuagint. There's Brenton's translation, which is a little older, so it will read a little more, the earth was unsightly and unfurnished. It will read with a little bit more of an archaic flavor, but that's there as well. So those are some options for translation. And then a lexicon. I do recommend a Septuagint lexicon. LEH is probably the best one that we've got in accordance for this. And this has a whole numbering system where it tells you how frequently a given word occurs in the different sets of books in the Septuagint. Those of you who already are using Greek on a regular basis or aspiring to, you will probably already have or at least know about the Greek English Lexicon of the New Testament and Early Christian Literature, BDAG. And this covers the Septuagint. It's in the name, New Testament and other early Christian literature, although to what extent the Septuagint is Christian literature per se would be a very interesting debate topic, but it covers a lot of the Septuagint, and you can see that. I mean, even if you just search all English for, well, let's see, maybe we'd want to search the abbreviations, but you're going to find Septuagint references all throughout here. Maybe the way to do that would be to search by scripture and just do, I don't know, Genesis. And you can see there's all these hits here. So it does treat the Septuagint. So if you are just getting into the Septuagint and already have BDAG, and especially if funds are an issue, see how far BDAG will take you, and it will take you most of the way. There will be the occasional word that is in the Septuagint and not in the New Testament and not in BDAG, and so in that case, LEH may have it, and it may be good to have that. So just consider that as another option in your library. So text, translation, and lexicon, those would be the three, and I'll start there. And actually, I know I said I would demo in number 4, but let me do this now. And please do, if you've got questions or comments about these resources or any other, please put those in the questions box if you got them. Let's get a workspace going, a very simple one. So I'll just type in Ralph's, and I've got that open here. And then I want the, let's say the NETS. I already had that open, so I can go to Add Parallel Recent Module. So that's there. And now what I want is I want a lexicon to be my default that treats the Septuagint in particular. Right now, if I triple click a word, which is one of several ways to look up a word, but still the way that I use, I find to be pretty quick. I triple clicked this word stereoma from 1.6 at firmament, and we've got that right there in the NETS. And it took me to BDAG, which is my default Greek lexicon. And this is a great example of where BDAG is enough. It says the sky is a supporting structure, the firmament, Genesis 1.6. In fact, I'm not even seeing, well, here's Colossians 2.5. All right, so it does have a New Testament reference, but it's got, I mean, First Maccabees, First Clement, which is not the Septuagint, it's Apostolic Fathers. Here's Psalm 18. Here's Enoch 18:2. So we've got some Philo. I mean, it's well beyond the New Testament. So I was good in that case. But you can change your drop-down menu here to LEH and see if it has any more. In this case, it doesn't. It still references Genesis 1.6. But as you go through this, your mileage will vary. But let's say I love BDAG, but maybe I just got LEH in my library and I just want to use that as my default. Maybe I'm only reading the Septuagint for the next hour or something like that. If you go to settings or preferences, and if you go to amplify, it's the second option here, you can change your triple click default. Right now it's BDAG. So I can change it to LEH, which I will do, hit OK. And now when I go to stereoma, triple click, 1, 2, 3, it goes right to that entry in LEH. Again, this was an example where it didn't make much difference because it's in BDAG. But if I triple click on other words now, I can keep LEH going as my default. I could always go back to BDAG and see what it's got. And again, most of the time it will cover it, but not always. So consider whether you want a Septuagint specific lexicon. There are other excellent lexicons out there that are just not licensed for accordance. And I know that's been attempted before. Muraoka has a great lexicon. And as far as I can see, that is not coming to accordance or any electronic format anytime soon. So we've got LEH. It's not as lengthy as Muraoka in some of its treatments, but I found it to be a really helpful lexicon. So those would be the three that I would start with, and you can do a lot with that. A text, a translation, and a lexicon. And then consider too whether you want Hebrew in the picture or not. I talked about how this is a great way to improve both languages at once. We'll get into that when we build the workspace, but here's a very basic workspace already where we've got a Greek Septuagint text, we've got an English translation of that Septuagint, and we've got a default lexicon over here that we can, every time we triple click, it can look up whatever word in the LEH lexicon. To go further, there's a great introduction to the Septuagint available in accordance, Jobs and Silva. It's called Invitation to the Septuagint. That is got pretty much everything you could imagine about the Septuagint, how we got it in more detail, why it's important, how it's used, manuscript traditions, translation technique, you name it, it's probably there. So that's a good introduction. And there are other introductions as well, quite a few of which are not available in accordance, but that's a good one that is. It's in its second edition now. I mentioned this book by Mueller, The First Bible of the Church, A Plea for the Septuagint. And as the title suggests, that is a little bit of an apologetic for the Septuagint. And I mean, it really is, right, a plea for the Septuagint. So it's not that this will not have history in it. It will be more with this kind of theological goal of saying, here's why we really need the Septuagint, and maybe even it ought to be what is in your bound print Bible or something like that. Jobes and Silva, their goal is much more survey overview. So I would recommend that to you. And then we've got a couple of guided readers in accordance. These are really interesting. Now, accordance, it almost makes a guided reader not necessary, although they're still great in print. But in accordance, you really can set up your workspace how you want. You can open up your instant details. You could even do a search where you tell accordance to basically find all words that occur 50 times or fewer, and then highlight those in the text so that that's all you see highlighted, and that's the only time you check, and you can just look at the instant details. So in a sense, you've got your own interactive reader's guide. But in print and also these electronic versions, these are still good because it really does save a lot of time. You don't have to set anything up. And so just to show you what this looks like, here's Decker's New Testament, I'm sorry, his Koine reader. So it covers New Testament and Septuagint and Apostolic Fathers. This is also integrated with some grammatical stuff, some review, some vocabulary. This is an excellent all-in-one resource, one of my just personally favorite language resources of all time, because it does so much, and he's so good at what he does. But if you go ahead here, you'll see in the let's see, readings outside the New Testament, here's the Septuagint. So he's got 6 readings, and here's Genesis. And he notes the New Testament student will be pleasantly surprised at how easy it is to read Genesis 1 in the Septuagint. Not everyone, but a lot of folks will come to the Septuagint from the New Testament, having had some Greek. And if that's the case, vocabulary is going to be a challenge, because for one, it's just a much bigger corpus, a much bigger body of literature. So there's going to be more vocabulary. The grammar can differ. It's translation Greek as opposed to what's called composition Greek. The New Testament was written in Greek, and this is true in other languages too. If you and I have a conversation in Spanish, we're going to be kind of making it up as we go. But if we are translating our favorite English novel into Spanish, it's gonna maybe, we want it to sound natural, but someone might be able to tell it's a translation. So that is the case with the Septuagint. But yeah, there are these challenges that come when you go from New Testament composition Greek to Septuagint translation Greek. Again, ideally it reads very smoothly. Maybe you often don't realize it's a translation, but it is. And so there are some things that arise. One of those things, as I said, is the vocabulary. And Decker would point out that's really not that big of an issue in Genesis. There's, of course, some unique vocabulary there, but if you've got a good grasp of the New Testament, you'll do great in Genesis. Job, probably another story. The Psalms, yeah, not as much, but Genesis for sure. So this reader's guide, he gives you some text, as noted here, and then he footnotes things like vocabulary and grammar. Everything is hyperlinked. And some of this, like I say, you could get this from the instant details. And so in that sense, this resource isn't adding anything in this case, but often he is. I mean, he's explaining what's going on here, and even how does this connect to the Hebrew. So I like this resource a lot. There's another similar one that's by Dr. Karen Jobes, Discovering the Septuagint, a guided reader, and she's got Genesis 1:1 as well. It's similar to Decker in the sense that you've got some text and then some explanatory footnotes. Again, as with Genesis 1:3, this you can get all in your instant details, but some of it you maybe won't be able to get. She's got more than Decker, just because Decker is after New Testament, Septuagint, Apostolic Fathers, and even the early creeds. This one is just the Septuagint. So those readers are great. Personally, and I say this as someone who regularly uses accordance, personally, I prefer to use the readers in print. but they're also here in accordance, and everything. One nice thing over the print edition is all the abbreviations are hyperlinked, and you can get in and out of verses very easily. So those are easy to recommend. I also just want to suggest for text critical work, I talked about text criticism. We've got the Göttingen editions, which I hyperlink to here. I probably, well, what's this, 2012, 13 years ago now. But even before that, I say about 15 years ago, I realized that these tools, these texts, they're wonderful. They have an apparatus that is very difficult to decipher, even more so than the NA28. So if you look at the NA28, for example, and when I say apparatus, I'm just talking about what all of these symbols point to. So if you click on this bracket, you get this. And if you take New Testament Greek or New Testament textual criticism, or even Introduction to New Testament, you'll get this apparatus and have to decipher it. And I think that's challenging enough. I mean, there's a lot to learn here. The equivalent in the Septuagint is the Göttingen editions. And so if let's just take Genesis here, and let's get the apparatus open. All right, so I've got something similar, but what is really hard about this apparatus is not just the different manuscripts, a lot of which are hyperlinked, but you also get a fair amount of abbreviated Latin and other symbols like this one, and then you go to the hyperlink and it's in German. So if you don't know German, that's tricky. All this is to say, these are not for the faint of heart. There's an excellent guide on doing text criticism and understanding the apparatus. It's written in German, so if you speak German, you are all set. I'd have to look up the link for it, but it exists. If you don't speak German, you could look at these two posts where I talk about what's going on in this apparatus, how do we read it? And the reason you would maybe be interested in this apparatus, and maybe you're not, but what this would do is help you to see that just like in the Greek New Testament, the Septuagint is looking at multiple manuscripts, and sometimes those manuscripts don't all say the same thing. And if that's the case, then this edition is going to put what it thinks is, the best available reading for us, but it's going to footnote all this stuff like different spelling, or maybe this phrase is not in this manuscript, or this phrase is. So even to say something like the Septuagint says, is to probably say, well, Rolfs or Göttingen says this, but underneath that, the question is, well, which Septuagint, which manuscript? Same thing with the New Testament. The Greek New Testament says, well, yes, we say that because we have a very reliable text, but even with that, well, which manuscript are you talking about here? So if that is of interest to you, the Göttingen editions are the way to go. This is not complete for the whole Septuagint, but new volumes are being published. It is not exactly fast work, as you can imagine. But if you want to see more, I've got two explanatory posts here. There's also an even, I think, better overview in this iOS CS post, which I've hyperlinked in the handout. Let me just put this in here. This talks about critical editions of the Septuagint and the difference between a diplomatic text and a critical text. That is all here. So you're getting lots of for further reading today, but this is a really good article, succinct overview. One other link, the Septuagint translation of the Hebrew Bible, its nature and importance for scholarship. This is by Emmanuel Tove, and this is a free PDF. It's in accordance, and he will walk through all kinds of things about the Septuagint. And so that's a great starting point. Again, just click on that and you've got the PDF. It's hosted on the Accordance webpage. He's done a number of Septuagint related resources. The text critical use of the Septuagint, text criticism of the Hebrew Bible, which covers that, and this MT-LXX parallel, which we'll get into in just a moment. What questions or comments do you have on this cornucopia of available resources that, again, the goal here is just to get you started in accordance, although I guess by the time you get to Göttingen, you're getting pretty knee deep in text criticism. But what questions or comments do you have, or would you add anything to this? Oh, great. Here's a comment. Yeah, and I think I'm about overdue to get Accordance 14 on this machine. Somebody says, in Accordance 14, for an LXX text, one may choose the default triple-click lexicon via the set text pane display, choose advanced settings, and then placing your choice of lexicon in the default tool setting. I have LEH set as the default on each of my LXX texts. That's awesome, and I actually did not even know that. So thank you. So that comment is in the chat for those of you who want to see that again. That you can choose a default triple lexicon with the set text pane display, and that set text pane display is this right here, the gear icon set text pane display. So it would be somewhere in here. So that's great to know. Thanks for that comment. Great, good question. What are your thoughts on the Greek Septuagint suite with apparatus? Yeah, and we've got that as well. There is, let me just get back to this iOS CS link. I don't use Suite a whole lot. I just want to get back to this link here because it talks about, it puts Suite in conversation with the others. Two great text editions, Cambridge Septuagint and the Göttingen Septuagint, each with a minor edition and a major edition. And that just means, you know, a minor edition would more be like probably something handheld. Major edition would be, we're publishing it a volume at a time and it's very large. And so for the Cambridge Septuagint, that is Suite, which is the minor edition, which is parallel to Rolf's. And so they have different approaches. And so with Suite, it is diplomatic. So it's going to be based on a single manuscript, taking that as its base, and then pointing out where there may be divergences based on other manuscripts. In other words, Suite, and this isn't my evaluation of it, maybe you already know this, so I'm sorry about that if you do. Suite is based on, I mean, if you read Suite, you're reading a manuscript and then you've got footnotes explaining possible variations. If you're reading Göttingen, and the NA28 is the same, you're not reading an actual manuscript that has ever existed. Well, I mean, you are because you're holding one in your hands, but it is, it's using, it's called a critical text. So it describes here, a collection of the oldest recoverable texts, carefully restored book by book, aiming at achieving the closest approximation to the original translations. So it is, it's to say, this is our best bet of what some mystical original manuscript somewhere, I mean, it's not mystical because hopefully, I mean, maybe we'll never find it, but there's some original at some point. And the critical text does that. So Suite is different in the sense that it's a diplomatic text and it takes as its starting point an initial manuscript. So what are my thoughts on that? I mean, I think there are advantages to both. And I think if you're really going into text criticism, it's worth comparing both of them to see the difference. But yeah, I guess I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other on, like, do I think one is better than the other? I tend to use Rolf's more just because of familiarity with it and the connection to Göttingen. And I guess I do have a slight preference for a critical edition in general, but I for sure see the value in this. Now, to back way out, if your goal in reading the Septuagint is to get better at reading Greek, I would say use what Septuagint you have, or whichever, you know, is most inexpensive in the Accordance store if you're going to be purchasing one. I think for the purposes of improving Greek, you know, the difference of phrases and words here and there, it's not going to be entirely consequential. So that was a great question. Thanks for asking it. I hope I did some semblance of justice to answering. Yet more Septuagint resources. I'm not going to go through these, but I'll just click them here. And a lot of them come from Will Ross. Intro to Septuagint Studies, more Septuagint resources, and he's got, I am just going to show this, an absolutely gigantic Septuagint bibliography is what he calls this. And this is, I mean, you cannot, I mean, look at all the subheadings here. You've got introductions, handbooks, editions, translations, commentaries, biblical canon, scriptural inspiration. I mean, that gets into the theology of it. What does it mean to say the Bible is inspired? And having established that, is the Hebrew Bible only inspired? Is the Septuagint translation of it inspired? Is the English translation inspired? What do we do where they differ? I mean, there's a whole world of great questions. So this bibliography is just excellent, and it's right here, and there's a lot to it. So I commend that to you. I mentioned already the IOSCS. These are great places to go for more. All right, let's talk about some Septuagint related workspaces, and we'll spend the rest of the time with this. Again, I welcome comments and questions at any time. I did this first one already, Greek Septuagint, English translation, and Greek lexicon. And that's pretty simple. There's not much to that at all. If you have a blank workspace, you start from your library, and you could type in LXX, or maybe you know you want Suite, or maybe you know you want Ralph's. So open it, and then I haven't really gone through this, but if you go to that set text pane display, I mean, you may want to customize some things, maybe change the background, and let me know if I'm going too fast on any of this. Certainly change the font. And then a parallel English text. So maybe that's NETS again. And then the triple click default, we talked about that. And the instant details, I don't mention that here, but the instant details are always there. So that's a very basic workspace for reading the Septuagint. That's really all you need to read the Septuagint. In fact, you could argue you don't even need the English translation because you've got instant details in the lexicons. But even with good Greek knowledge, I find that I need more than the instant details in the lexicon, because I might understand it word by word, but I might not get what these words are doing together. And so flipping over to the translation can be helpful. So that's one very basic Septuagint workspace that you might set up in accordance. Another one is bringing the Hebrew in. And we're going to build this a couple different ways. I link here to a resource that I'm about to use, but let's do this without English translations first, and then we'll do it with English translations. So I'm going to get Rolf's open again. And now I want and you know what? I need to set my text pane display, customize theme, parchment. I made the font bigger, use as default. Because I didn't set that before, it reverted to the other one. So, all right, there it is. Now I'm going to add parallel, and I'm going to open up a parallel Hebrew Bible. Take BHS, and you may do the same thing here. Set text pane display, customize theme. Maybe we make that newsprint or something like that. Click OK. I forgot to set it as default, but anyway, here's Greek and Hebrew side by side. This is a great way, as I said before, to work on both languages at once. There are lots of words where I don't know both the Greek and the Hebrew, so I will be using the instant details. But there are also lots of words where I might know the Greek but not the Hebrew, or vice versa. And so again, if I get stuck on a word in one language, I can look at the other one to help me. You will notice as I'm hovering over the Greek text, the Hebrew text is cross-highlighting, which is a wonderful feature. Apen is say, and here we have Vayomer. It goes the other way too. Elohim is God, and my cursor is right here where the blue circle is, but at left, Ha-theos is cross-highlighting. Rakia for expanse, stereoma for, well, firmament, meso for batok, for middle, and so on. This cross-highlighting is great because not only, I mean, I could look at it like this without cross-highlighting and just see, okay, verse 6, let me read it in both. But this cross-highlighting really pinpoints what Hebrew word it is that the Greek is translating. And like I say, this is bidirectional, so you can ask it another way. Well, how does the Greek translate this Hebrew word? Again, this is enough as a workspace, but how this is happening is through use of this MT-LXX parallel tool, which I want to show you that. And I'm just going to open this separately here. Now, this opened to Exodus 12:51 because that's the last place I was. As I scroll my Greek text, the Hebrew text follows it. MT-LXX parallel does not. So I can go to tab tie, and I can tie this tab to LXX Rolf's tagged. And when I do, you get this little up arrow, down arrow, and it scrolls in tandem now. So now as I scroll, it follows me, which is great. So now what I can do is I can see not only in verse 11, I've got Kai Apin, and the Hebrew for that is Vayomer, and vice versa, Vayomer, Kai Apin. I can also see in this MT-LXX parallel tool columns where the Hebrew is at the left column and the Greek is at the right column. I could put this, I mean, you could even, put this down here if you'd rather, but I'm going to keep it here for now. So this is showing me in column form how different Hebrew words are translated by Greek. But what this adds to this cross highlighting is its own apparatus. And so we get to, let's find this in the Greek text. So we're reading through, and we get to this phrase here, lamino, asher, and so on. And we have in the Hebrew and the Greek some kind of difference. And these footnotes, and this is its own apparatus. I don't think it's as hard as Göttingen or the NA28, but it will tell you why you're seeing a plus or a minus here. And often what's happening is that the Greek is rendering a Hebrew word that you're not seeing in the BHS, because remember, it's translating older manuscripts, or vice versa. As you scroll through here, you'll see, for example, change in word order. So you've got this word order adjustment. You've got, that's a pretty common one, difference in sequence. There's a lot of this Hebrew retroversion. So this phrase, which is why I couldn't find it in the Hebrew, it's not in the Hebrew, but katagenos is in Greek. Where does it come from? See how that's not moving in the cross highlighting? Well, here's a reconstruction of it according to Tove. This is really useful for studying translation technique, but also just going back and forth between Greek and Hebrew. You could use all of this without the parallel and just get the cross highlighting, which itself is great. But when that cross highlighting seems to get stuck, you may wonder, well, where is the Hebrew for this? And chances are it's explained by some kind of manuscript difference, and the MT-LXX parallel is going to tell you typically what that is. If you go to the very beginning of this module, you will see the whole list of symbols, explanation of symbols. So basically this tool is a parallel alignment, but it's got all of the different ways that it may differ. So you've got what's called a minus or a plus, and Tove is careful to not say the Septuagint leaves that out, because maybe no one's leaving anything out. It just doesn't have it. So it's a minus as compared to the Hebrew text, or a plus. The Septuagint has a long plus here. It's got 4 lines in this tool that the Hebrew text doesn't have. Well, we can't technically say the Septuagint is adding this, because maybe it's that the Hebrew text left it out. We don't know. He's just using these neutral terms, plus and minus. So there's a lot here, and you may do well to just scroll through this and see, but everything is also hyperlinked in the parallel itself with the footnoted. You can see here in the instant details what's going on. So that's a great tool, and again, whether you use it or not, this cross highlighting is available. I will just add now English translations to this. So maybe the instant details are enough, maybe they're not, but you can make a nice little workspace where you've got Greek, Hebrew, and then an English translation. Remember, an English translation of each. So I will do the NETS for my English translation of the Septuagint. And now for an English translation of the Hebrew Bible, I've got lots of choices. I mean, that's going to be almost every other English Bible in my library. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So I will just go with the NIV. And then you can even play with this, click, hold, drag. If you want to put it right next to the Septuagint, you can do it that way. You can also use the gear icon and move it down. I'm going to move this one down. And what you might even do is have a window like this. Might even close the instant details. Give yourself much more Greek and Hebrew as a visual reminder that that's what you're reading, but you've got the translations underneath here. Now, your cross-highlighting is going to vary depending on translation. I'm cross-highlighting between Hebrew and Greek, and as long as you have the MTLXX tool, either the parallel or there's a smaller, cheaper interlinear version, as long as you have that, Greek and Hebrew will cross-highlight, and any other key number text will cross-highlight. So here I've got, for example, let me get back up to verse 10. When I hover over the word land in the NIV, I get both the Hebrew eretz and the Greek gain, which is great. So I can see everything all at once. Conspicuously absent is a cross highlight for land, and that's because the NETS is not a key number text. So that's not a mistake. It's by design. It is a design that's lacking something I would love to have. There are not any key number texts that are tagged like this for English translations of the Septuagint, but you can still get pretty close here with 3 out of the 4. So you may consider an English translation for your Hebrew text that has key numbers, and then you can make your way through as much text as you want this way. Everything else in this handout is more advanced study. It is, we're actually going to do the infer command in a search class. I think it's either next week or the week after, but there will be another webinar on the infer command, but you can use it to go back and forth between the Greek New Testament and the Septuagint to find common vocabulary. There is a blog post summary right here if you want to read now. And then the merge command, which is one of the more advanced commands in accordance. It was written specifically, it was programmed specifically for this MTLXX parallel tool. There are 2 excellent summary blog posts by David Lang, linked here and here. And then I try to do a step-by-step walkthrough of how you would do that. So this is, you're not getting a demo, but there is written documentation if you want to try this on your own. If you're interested, please let me know in the chat. I've done a merge command webinar before that specifically has to do with translation technique. If you're interested, let me know, and I'd love to offer that again. It's been a little while. But you've got lots of further reading after today on those last 2 pages. If you're wanting to take another step, or maybe you've used these before and you've forgotten, or maybe you are using them every day and you just want another sample study, that's there at the end of your handout. Once you've got a workspace set up, you may just want to go to File, Save As, and give it a name and save that workspace, and then you can access it. I'm doing this kind of quickly, but then you can access that from Open Workspace. I have, as you can see here, I've got some workspaces I built up over the years. Here is Greek Psalms, and so for that, I just exactly what we did, but it's all together. I've got a Septuagint text, a Hebrew text, English translations of each, and the MTLXX parallel over here. This is not readable. Well, it's not very readable, and that was on purpose because I was really wanting to focus on Greek. Maybe should make that background the same, but yeah, there are lots of things you can do, and then once you've got a workspace you like, again, go to File, Save As, and give that workspace a name so that you can access it later. There's lots of different ways you could build on this too with different Septuagint resources. You might even have a zone full of different Septuagint dictionary articles and that Job Silva introduction and readers and things like that. So we'll stop there. Just to recap, we've talked about what the Septuagint is and why to study it. We've talked about getting started with the Septuagint in accordance. yet more Septuagint resources, and then some Septuagint related workspaces to close. Oh, great. Here's a good comment. I'll put this in the chat. Somebody says a cheap way to upgrade to Accordance 14 is to purchase Accordance 14 for $9.90. That sales price was extended. Great, good to know. And I've got a discount code for you all. Actually, let me end the recording, and then I'll stay on for just a couple minutes. So we'll end the recording and let that process. If you are watching the recording and you want the handout, again, abramkj@accordancebible.com.